Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to pop the hood on the economy. And look, we're not just talking about prices getting higher. We're going to explore why inflation is really a signal, kind of like a mechanical response from a system that's under some serious pressure.
You hear these arguments all the time, right? But what if all these popular ideas kind of miss the bigger picture? What if inflation isn't really about good guys and bad guys, but about the fundamental mechanics of our economic system?
All right, let's really dig into this quote from the OECD, because this is our whole starting point. The idea is that inflation isn't the disease, it's a symptom. It's basically the check engine light flashing on your dashboard, screaming at you that the system is way out of balance.
So, to understand that warning light, we've got to look at the engine itself. And, at its heart, the economy is just this constant, delicate balancing act between what all of us want to buy and what our economy can physically produce. What's really fascinating is that economists have a specific way to measure this imbalance. They call it the output gap. And when we're trying to produce way more than our sustainable limit, that gap gets bigger, and the whole system starts to overheat.
And this really shows the two main ways that pressure can build up. On the one hand, you've got demand pull. That's like you're just slamming your foot on the accelerator. Too much money chasing not enough stuff. And on the other hand, you've got cost push, which is more like the engine itself is losing power because, say, the price of gas or parts suddenly goes through the roof.
And here's what that looks like visually. See, our ability to supply stuff is pretty much fixed in the short term, right? You can't just snap your fingers and build a new factory. But demand? Oh, demand can shoot way, way past that capacity. According to the IMF, it's exactly this gap, this constant pressure of demand outrunning supply, that forces prices to go up to try and find a new balance.
So, how does this imbalance get so supercharged? Well, the economic engine doesn't just run on the money we make today. Oh no, it has a turbocharger, and that turbocharger can inject a massive amount of spending into the system, like instantly. And that turbocharger is credit.
So here's the crucial thing to get. Credit isn't some magic wand. It doesn't create new resources or more things to buy. All it really does is let us pull our future spending power into the present. It lets all of us go on this huge collective shopping spree using money we haven't even earned yet.
And when interest rates are low, borrowing becomes ridiculously cheap. As research from the Bank for International Settlements points out, this kicks off a huge wave of borrowing for all the big-ticket items. All that spending happens right now, creating this massive, sudden surge in demand. But the houses and factories that money is for, well, they take years to actually build, and that creates this incredible mismatch in time that just pours gasoline on the inflationary fire. Okay, so that explains the first big price spike. But why does inflation get so sticky? You know, why does it hang around long after the initial reason, like a government stimulus check or a supply chain problem, is long gone? Well, it's because the system creates its own powerful echo chamber. And this is the classic feedback loop that we call the wage-price spiral. It's a totally logical sequence of events. If you think about it, prices go up, so your paycheck doesn't buy as much, so you need a raise. But your raise increases costs for your company, so they have to raise their prices. And that, of course, makes everything more expensive for everyone else, who then, you guessed it, also need a raise. And round we go. The OECD points to three main ways this stickiness gets hardwired right into the economy's code. First, our own expectations. If we all think prices are going to be higher tomorrow, what do? We buy today, which of course causes prices to rise. Second, that wage price spiral we just walked through. And third, you've got things like rental agreements or supply contracts that are automatically tied to inflation, essentially baking yesterday's price hikes right into tomorrow's costs.
Okay, so the system is overheating, and inflation is stuck on repeat. How in the world do central banks and governments cool things down? And maybe more importantly, why is the cure so often so painful for so many people?
Well, the tools they have are basically blunt instruments, not precision scalpels. They can raise interest rates, which makes borrowing more expensive and slows down spending, but that almost always leads to people losing their jobs. Or the government can cut its own spending and raise taxes, but that acts like a direct brake on the entire economy. There's just no magic, pain-free button to push.
Now, this is a really crucial point from the IMF's analysis. And honestly, it's a stark one. When central banks raise interest rates to fight inflation, the job losses that happen, they're not some unfortunate accident. They are the primary mechanism. The whole goal is to reduce demand and cool down the labor market enough to finally break that wage price spiral. It literally works by creating economic pain.
So let's bring this all home. When we look at all the different pieces on the board, demand, supply, credit, our own expectations, a really clear picture starts to form. You know, the single most important thing to take away from this is to stop thinking about inflation as a story of greed or bad decisions. It's more like physics. It is simply what happens when a system is pushed beyond its sustainable limits. That pressure has to go somewhere, and it gets released in the form of higher prices for everybody.
And thinking about it this way leaves us with one last, really critical question. If inflation is the system's pressure warning, and interest rates are the main valve that we use to release that pressure, what actually happens when you start to tighten that valve? What bends, what breaks, and what's the ultimate price of getting things back in balance? We'll dig into that next time on The Explainer.